I was interested in Bitcoin really from the very beginning. My big mistake was not getting actively involved in investing. But now I believe now we've achieved escape velocity now, and there's no stopping this rocket. That's my firm belief. I love Bitcoin. I love the project. I really believe in it. Absolutely in awe of its transformational power. It's not attached to a country. For me, is one of its most powerful things. There's no political agenda with Bitcoin. I was born in South Africa, grew up there. I moved to Belgium. I moved to the United States. I lived in New York for many years. What I have learned from living in all these different places is that there's good people everywhere, and actually pretty much in the same proportion, the good people and assholes,
Before we get started with all the topics, give us some overview for the viewers and for the listeners who you are and why you're excited about Bitcoin.
Okay, well, my name is Bradley Duke. I am the head of Europe at Bitwise and also on the executive team at Bitwise. I founded ETC Group about 6 years ago. It was in 2019, and we grew this digital assets company in Europe. We have a very big Bitcoin ETP, and the company was acquired in August of last year by Bitwise. So now we're part of Bitwise. We're very similar, and the two companies are very similar. So it was an easy to join Bitwise. Culturally, it was a good fit, and really happy to be working at Bitwise and leading the team in Europe.
Awesome. And so the group, was that the same thing? I might be confused, but it's the same thing which launched the first Bitcoin ETP in Europe, I think 2015?
Yeah, so ETC Group, we launched the first centrally cleared Bitcoin ETP, and the first product ever on Seyr on Deutsche Börse. But that was in 2020. It was in June of 2020. There was the previous product the product that was very early was the XBT provider. That was one that was listed up in, I think, in Sweden. Many years before. It was always very difficult to get these products approved, and from a regulatory perspective. And so it was great that the guys from XBT provider managed to do that so early, and they accumulated a lot of assets. They were well rewarded for their hard work. But we thought, when we listed our product, we thought, look, we can do this, and we can do it better, and we can make a product that's that's best in class and that tracks the underlying better. It's more liquid, all the things on a proper exchange. The Deutsche Börse ETF board is the biggest and the most liquid in Europe. So yeah.
I guess you were also, before you started the whole thing with the company, already in Bitcoin and kind of orange pilled beforehand?
So I was interested in Bitcoin really from the very beginning. My big mistake was not getting actively involved in investing, but I was interested academically in what was going on. I was, whenever I see an article, in The Economist or in any of the news outlets about Bitcoin, I would always read it. I even had search, these alerts. At the time, there weren't that many articles, so I had some alerts on my Google alerts on Bitcoin. And I would read articles and follow from a distance, but I was really just interested in what they were doing, from a sort of a libertarian outlook. And also just really, I've always had a very strong interest in technology. I've always worked on the technology side of finance. And so it was kind of logical that I would be interested in Bitcoin. I would say that my true sort of orange pilling didn't happen until quite a lot later. I always was interested in Bitcoin, but I didn't really get it. I didn't really get the transformational power that it would have. And even if I did get it, I didn't really believe that it would happen. And then it was only later on, much more recently, that I started to see, wow, this is happening. This is, and now it's becoming too big and too strong to stop. And really, then I started to really believe and then also expand my view of what Bitcoin could do, as a force for transformation of the world in just so many areas, So.
Yeah, it sounds in the beginning. I remember the first time when I heard it, is it almost a little bit too good to be true? Like,
Right.
is this really happening?
Yeah. Exactly. I was kind of waiting for things to go bad, like for the regulator to, just ban it or to say outlaw it or to make it. And effectively, that's kind of what was going on in the US for a while. It was sort of death by a thousand cuts. They were changing the laws around accounting. They were changing, the SEC was just making it incredibly difficult for any any innovation in crypto and in Bitcoin as well, and the banks as well. The incumbent sort of gatekeepers of personal finance were really really closing the doors. And I thought maybe for a while that it wasn't going to happen. That was a great idea that would be killed off. But now I believe now we've achieved escape velocity now, and there's no stopping this rocket. That's my firm belief.
That's great to hear. It's also interesting for me whenever I speak with someone that comes from traditional finance or like interacts with traditional finance, and I feel like we feel that it's already quite interconnected with Bitcoin, and there's a lot already going on. But at the same time, I think we're just right at the start of that. I think a lot of people still don't get it. Like there's only like a few outliers that really understand what Bitcoin is, especially if you look at big companies. They all like have a small portion, even if they're in, and there are only very few companies that are really betting big on Bitcoin, like MicroStrategy and like Semi-Scientific, like Metaplanet. Like there are a few that really go head on. How early would you say? Like how would you describe the journey from institutional investment into Bitcoin, where we are in that moment?
Yeah, well, it's a really interesting question. It's quite a nuanced question. There's a lot to that. I think we're in different places in Europe and the US, for example, and then of course in Asia as well, and around the world. Every country, every jurisdiction, legal jurisdiction is on its own journey. It all depends a lot on the regulator, how the regulator is approaching. We saw in the US if with the shift in the change in administration there, and then the shift in the SEC, what a difference that made. Where we had now all the large banks and large established, let's call them TradFi institutions, starting to really have their own businesses in Bitcoin and crypto. And really looking at ways that they could get involved, whether it's in custody or in financing or, asset management. And so there's this whole shift that's happening, and it doesn't happen overnight. A lot of these institutions are very cautious by nature. They, have a very measured approach. They've got whole committees looking at risk, looking at, various, the aspects of moving into this new area. People have to educate themselves, and it takes time. But I feel like it's moving a lot faster in the US than in Europe, even though Europe had a really good head start. We had Bitcoin ETPs, which are the equivalent, only different by name to the ETFs in the US. Early as sort of 2019, even this XBT provider product we talked about was, I think 2015. And, very early exchange traded product. Wasn't physically backed, but it was a product where you could get exposure. And there were banks also in Switzerland who were issuing certificates, giving exposure to Bitcoin early on. And then in Europe, of course, we've got so many products now, these Delta One products where people can get exposure to Bitcoin, other cryptocurrencies. And this is there's really a big choice. And there's much wider range than in the US, where US still only has Bitcoin and ETH as the ETF available, and whereas in Europe we can have pretty much, there's a lot more, and we can have staking ETPs, and we've got basket ETPs, and but in terms of the adoption in Europe, it's kind of gone slower. It's gone different at different speeds in different regions. Germany has been like probably one of the areas which has been the most advanced. Switzerland, of course, outside of the EU, but there's been a lot of innovation there, giving full banking license to crypto banks, which was a huge step forward. And then we see also in Germany, even UCITS funds, making allocation towards crypto ETPs, so it's happening. It's kind of unstoppable, but I think the key is education. A lot of people are investors just hardly even know what Bitcoin is, and if they know, maybe they know Bitcoin, then maybe they know Ethereum as well, and that's kind of about it. So it's a lot of, for us at Bitwise, we see our role as a lot of hand holding, educating, producing research, answering questions, because people know what they know and don't want to look stupid, So yeah.
And I feel like there's also a big difference between the political layer and the grassroots layer. When we have in Germany, of course, they sold the Bitcoin, but this also has some other reasons. And we see some parties really having bad stance on what Bitcoin is, and showing when all the elections, I always look at what are political parties saying to Bitcoin. And in those stands, you usually can see a lack of education, to put it nicely.
Sure.
But at the same time, in Germany, we have one of the highest density of full nodes of Bitcoin, and we have a grassroots movement there, and like there's a great meetup culture there. So there's almost like a difference between the political layer and the grassroots layer, which in America I feel like it's more aligned, where the political layer gets it more and more. I just saw actually today a video from Trump saying, "Hey, it's important, the game theory aspect, we should do it, not China." And I think he said that he has had Bitcoin before the second term started, or some like things like that. That I'm like, if that comes from the European Union, from head of the European Union or something like that, that would be amazing. But I think we're far away from the political layer being in Europe really into Bitcoin, even though the regulatory framework has been there for longer, which is kind of confusing for me.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I think maybe that's something. Look, US is always kind of, they have a huge advantage, and they always have a huge advantage over us in Europe, and that's simply the fact that that they can it's one legal jurisdiction. Of course, you have states have their own laws and everything, but it's it's not the same. Once Europe has got a bigger population base. There's I don't know what the latest statistics are. It's something like 550 million people. Which makes it a lot bigger than the US overall. But the US has one language, it has one legal system, and that's like it's a huge difference for them in terms of just getting stuff done and then being able to reach everybody across there. Whereas in Europe, we'll have each country has its own, moving at its own speed. One, changes of government, exactly what you're talking about. And then of course there's the European Union, which sits over it all, and there's a lot more layers. It's much more complex. But I would say something that maybe they do better in the US is they really, take time. I know, like at Bitwise, I've seen, our president Teddy Fusaro, going to Congress and sitting on these congressional committees and educating about Bitcoin and about crypto and its transformation, transformational power, and we don't really, of course. I tried to do, I think last week we were actually at the House of Lords in the UK. There was this UK-US Crypto Alliance, and it was kind of like it's sort of a lobby group. But it's, I think we can probably do better in just educating the politicians, the lawmakers, about Bitcoin in particular, and what the power that it can give as a as a monetary system.
It's also interesting. I think when we first met at Bitcoin Prague, we talked a little bit about that, how difficult it actually is for big institutions to custody and make sure Bitcoin is all safe, because with banks, you have the possibility to revoke things and stuff like that. But with Bitcoin, you put in the address, you make the transaction. It's there where it is supposed to be, or it's not supposed to be. How was it from like doing all those things on Bitcoin, as it's such a different asset than having a stock or something like that, where you have basically just paperwork?
Right. Well, I mean, it was really, when we were starting the company, we spent a lot of time thinking about this. Of course, if you think about it, like if you just got a regular ETF, let's say it's a ETF that represents, the top stocks in Europe, all it does is it buys these stocks, holds them, and it rebalances whenever the rebalancing happens. So, but when it buys and sells the stocks, it's really simple, because these payment rails are there, right? You're using Clearstream or Euroclear or whatever, and the exchanges, you buy the stock, you send, money in one direction, the securities electronically come the other direction. When you sell, the securities go and the money comes back, right? And it happens, the system is set up so it happens automatically. The money's there, it transfers at the same time as the shares are moved. If you're doing a Bitcoin ETP, you've now got a security, so you've got the stock, the shares that are there, but there's no payment rail. Because it's Bitcoin. Our products are all in-kind creation or redemption. So people, when it's created, of course, you can trade on the secondary market by just buying and selling, like you buying shares. But when the units are created and redeemed, in what we call the primary market, we have to receive the Bitcoin first, and so we had to develop this whole other mechanism and introduce this notion of this, independent administrator to kind of to check, because if you make a mistake with crypto, it's unlikely you'll ever get the funds back. You just if you send the Bitcoin to the wrong address or whatever, good luck with that. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's unlikely. Whereas if you do that in just regular and traditional banking, you can always just pick up the phone and say, sorry, I made a mistake. Can you reverse that transaction? So what we do is we send the shares free of payment, without getting any cash coming back, and the other thing, and the Bitcoin goes on a separate payment rail. I think over time that'll change with the the mass adoption of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. Eventually there'll probably be crypto payment rails that are built in, but I think that's not going to happen for a long time. So there was a lot of things we had to look at. We had to look at custodian very carefully, understand the security around that. This whole whitelisting process, this is because we knew that if we just made one mistake, people are trusting us to hold all this crypto for them. If we made one mistake, then the business would be over. So we've really over-engineered the security side because of what Bitcoin and crypto is. Yeah.
Trust takes a long time to build and can be gone for very quickly.
So that's the truth. And that's the thing, right? The whole, I at heart, I really, I understand and I feel for the Bitcoin, maxi and the way that they think, and, don't trust, verify, and, not your keys, not your crypto, all these phrases that are there. I really understand them and believe them. But when you're dealing with institutional investors and also a lot of retail investors who are not technologists, who don't understand the tech, these crypto ETPs are kind of like it's just another channel. It's another access point for people to get involved, because if you expect them to actually manage their own cold storage, and then the adoption will just be that much slower. So this is kind of an accelerator, these crypto ETPs, to adoption, and for the reaching out and people understanding what Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies actually are.
There's a lot of I have no clue what the answer to that is, but I have a lot of question of how the future of Bitcoin will look like. Now, obviously, we are in a very long transition phase where there's traditional finance, there's like fiat, there's like all these other cryptos, there's a lot of other assets that might, I mean, we have, was it like 100 currencies over the world, something like that. Yeah. And we have a lot of fiat currencies. Bitcoin vision actually fulfills within the next, 100 years, 200 years. And Bitcoin is the world reserve asset, world reserve currency. Will there still be Bitcoin banks? How will they look like? And how will people actually like custody their coins? There are many different, because in the early days of the internet, I've heard from stories, because I'm not old enough to live through that, but I heard that in the early days of the internet, a lot of people thought everyone will run their own email servers. Right. But now everyone runs on Gmail on some like 3-4 different servers, which centralized the internet, which has some problems, of course, with data privacy and all those things. So I'm really curious, and I have like no clue how this looks like, and probably nobody really has. But it's fun to speculate on what does it, if Bitcoin is to the maximum successful, how does the world in 200 years look like on a Bitcoin standard? Like, I don't know if you have a framework to think about that.
Yeah, look, it's something that I think about, and actually as a company at Bitwise we think about as well. What does the future look like? Kind of, in a way, you have to be thinking about that. Where are we going? Not just to live and be reactive to what's happening, in the news on a day-to-day basis, but think like, where look down the road further. Where's this going? Where do we need to be? And I think one of the most interesting things that's going on at the moment is just the growth of AI. It's becoming more and more prevalent in our lives every day. I know certainly in my circle of friends, there's a lot of people that, they use ChatGPT as really kind of like a, therapist asking questions, asking for guidance. And this is, it's the beginning of a long journey where we kind of enmesh, with this artificial intelligence. And that's going to happen in banking as well. It's starting to happen already, and it will continue to happen. And actually, when you think about it, right, with the let's say called traditional finance, it's very, very difficult for AI to operate within that traditional finance world, just because it's the way it's been set up. It's very human focused. Whereas digital assets is so much easier. And that's why I'm a big believer in tokenization. I think tokenization is going to happen. Every asset that's possible, that's a traditional finance asset, will be tokenized over time, and there'll be a lot of competition. There'll be some real big winners, and there'll be a lot of winners, and there'll of course be a lot of losers, like there always is in business. But with that happening, tokenization of assets, and also the tokenization of currencies, which has already happened with the stablecoin, then you can have an AI agent who you can give free rein to manage your portfolio. You can say, here it is, here's access. This is my, through a Web3 interface. These are my assets. Go out there, find out what to do, optimize. This is my investment objectives. This is my risk. You can define your risk, appetite, and I think this will become dominant in the world of finance, and personal finance as well, where people are using agents to help them, with what they're doing, whether it's trying to buy a house in the real world or just to manage their and optimize their assets and respond as well to market signals, and that can only really truly happen in a world where everything is tokenized and on chain. The future is on chain. And look, your quick question was specifically more targeted towards Bitcoin. Bitcoin, I love Bitcoin. I love the project. I really believe in it. Absolutely in awe of its transformational power. I think it's just over time, it's just going to grow in stature. And the fact that it's neutral, it's not attached to a country, is for me is one of its most powerful things. And that's why I believe it will become the world reserve currency, because there's no political agenda with Bitcoin. There's no, with the US dollar or any euro or any one of the large currencies around the world, it's always attached to an ideology, to a country. It can be weaponized, if against enemies of those countries or regions. And with Bitcoin, that's not possible. And that's why I think people will prefer to hold that than to hold, euro or dollar or euro-denominated treasuries, US treasuries, or whatever major currency around the world. And I think that there will be this, this march will continue towards Bitcoin being that global reserve currency.
It's interesting with tokenization because I was before I started the podcast, I was really harsh against anything that was not Bitcoin. With the podcast, I realized there are some use cases, not in crypto, but especially in stablecoins. There are some real world use cases where someone can actually use stablecoins, and they might, for some reason, have a hard time with Bitcoin because the volatility is still there. And if there's a kid in Africa sitting there with with 10 to 20% in volatility, it can be frustrating. So stablecoins really they kind of close some gap between the traditional rails and the new rails. And the only thing that I'm always wondering with tokenization of stocks and stuff like that, or tokenizations of other currencies, is they're already kind of tokenized. They're already kind of digital. So they have, it's a different rail. It's a different technical rail, but to a degree they are already tokenized if you know what I mean.
Yeah, look, I do know what you mean, and you're right. They are, money is already digital, right? Let's say when you go pay, we mostly just tap our card or our phone. I never carry cash. And that can be very inconvenient in certain countries where you really have to carry cash. But I've just kind of fallen out of the habit of doing it, or even carrying a wallet with me. And that's so it is, it is digitized cash, and so is stock trading. It's all electronic. It all happens fixed protocol or whatever. There's these electronic protocols that are talking to exchanges, and settlement is happening electronically as well. And has been for many years. But I think the big difference, and the point that's important to articulate here, is that when people move their wealth on chain, okay, and this is happening to more and greater extent every day, there's a lot of friction with bringing it back. Okay, so if you hold, let's say, a significant part of your company's treasury or your personal net worth on chain, and then you have to interact with these digitized, but let's call them real world or TradFi products, then you have to sell, get cash, put cash into your bank, then move it into your brokerage account, and there's friction. There's also a lot of the banks saying, what is this? Is it, and I don't know what it's like, where you live, but certainly in the UK, it's really, really sticky in terms of doing this. The bank really gets in your face. What's going on here? What is the source of funds? Explain this to me. They suspend your account. And this is still happening, right? So people don't want to bring their funds back. They want to keep them on chain, and that's why stablecoins are so important. Because then people can say, okay, maybe I don't want necessarily all this volatility for all my assets. I still would like exposure to something like, let's say, Magnificent 7, or a single stock, Nvidia. Let's say you like that, and you want to get exposure to that for whatever reason. And if you can do it tokenized by exchanging USDT or USDC or whatever stablecoin for a tokenized asset, then that way, that saves you having to do the cost of that translation, and bringing it back. And the same as if you want to buy a house, like let's say, for example, you want to buy a house, you've got a lot of Bitcoin, you don't necessarily, so it makes sense if you can kind of borrow against the Bitcoin rather than anything else, so the more services and the more DeFi, on-chain financial services are offered, the better it is for people, and it will also accelerate and speed up adoption.
The first time I ever made any money, I got myself from that money a watch. And ever since then, I collect timepieces to remember times where I achieved some milestone. That's why I got the Bitcoin 2025 edition when I went to my first ever American Bitcoin conference. So for me, the Bitcoin watches from Coin Vigilant represents the time that we are living in. For every person that wears a Bitcoin watch, I know they are representing sound money to the outside world. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I know how big of a hurdle it can be to have self-custody, but it's so freaking important to make that first step. We have to make sure it's as easy and simple as possible. And that's exactly what BitBox did. BitBox created the simplest and the easiest hardware wallet to use to get into self-custody. So get yourself a BitBox down from the link in the description. And when you use code Robin, you even get a 5% discount. I do believe that too. And I had the discussion yesterday actually with someone where this is, as Bitcoiners, we are really against crypto. We are really against even all the CBDCs and stuff like that, the digital currencies. But I honestly think it is almost kind of a Trojan horse, almost kind of like something that if you have a digital wallet and you have like Bitcoin, some Ethereum and some digital euro in there, and you constantly see it over time, you see like, hey, like there's this one thing that just constantly preserves my wealth the best way, because Bitcoin has the most soundest monetary function. And think if we have everything in like on-chain and everything in digital crypto wallets, I think naturally Bitcoin will win even faster than if we force down all the crypto things just because we don't like it ethically or ideology wise. So this is what I meant before. I changed a lot on that. Previously I was really toxic against all crypto projects, and I'm like, no, it's the entry, it's the entry truck, and they will eventually come to Bitcoin. It's the entry door to Bitcoin eventually, because they will have a digital wallet and there's like one winner, and eventually they're like, hey, why am I not in this project? Why I'm not in this Bitcoin thing?
Look, I agree with you. And look, I recognize the importance of other cryptocurrencies. I think I do love Bitcoin. It's my first love. It's my true love. And it is, but it's a project for me. Bitcoin is something all on its own. It doesn't, it's all the other ones, all the other, cryptos out there are associated with a country, they're associated with people, there's some pre-mine, there's all this kind of stuff that doesn't exist in the world of Bitcoin. And I think, and I see, let's look at Ethereum. It's used for stable coins, it's used for tokenization. It's basically it's this global technology platform to allow innovation and development. Okay. and it's very well run. And so absolutely it should exist and it's useful. There's one thing to look at something in terms of an investment for your own personal, well-being and let's say wealth preservation, or just, holding on to what you've got, in terms of it not being eroded by, the constant printing of money that's happening everywhere, around the world. But it's another to think about. We've actually got a real problem, business problem we want to solve, and and blockchain tech is actually the right thing for it. And Bitcoin doesn't answer all those questions. It doesn't solve all those problems. It solves the most important problems, I think, globally, in terms of, what it can do to transform and to fix the world, and I really, really am a firm believer in fix the money, fix the world. Once people start to see that and start to understand how much and how many problems in the society come from the fact that the money system is wrong, it's not correct, it's broken. Fiat currency is not really based on anything. It's based on a country saying, we will stand by this, and at a certain point, it's logical. It has to break down. And so, look, I don't think, these local currencies and fiat currencies in whatever form they end up in will disappear. But I think the importance of Bitcoin will grow in the world as there's this growing realization when people, because it's not something that people can get their head around quickly. It takes time. It took me a long time, and I thought about it a lot. It took me a long time before I really, really got it, and started to see, and I was truly orange pilled. Yeah.
That's, I think Saifedean Ammous gave the answer that I like the most. He's like, there might be some other values in the overall crypto sphere, but Bitcoin goes through the biggest market ever. It's the 400-500 trillion money market. The kind of the problem of like, where do I store my financial energy? Right. And other things might solve for other things. But this is kind of the sound money market, and there's a lot of debate on how big this opportunity is. I think he mentioned the 400-500 trillion, and then people say like 200 trillion, people say like 800 trillion. I think it's just like a lot.
Yeah, we don't understand, and I have to say that's one of the things. We really don't understand numbers when they get very large. It's just words. It's a gazillion. It's a lot. So
yeah, and I think when we talk about, there's like 200 million or 400 trillion, it doesn't sound that much bigger. But if in scale, if you put like 200 million people or 400 trillion people on scale, like if you have like those graphics, it's just like such a tiny thing to like such a big, like you cannot even imagine how big the scale between those two things are.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's just a, it's a human mind thing. There isn't a way that, unless you're kind of a mathematician and you're so particularly gifted in that area, I think for most people, once numbers get over, I think we understand millions, I think we understand billions. And then beyond that, it just starts to, it's hard to really kind of like pin down what it means. We know it's a huge, but we talk about the US debt, 36, 37 trillion. Yeah, it's a huge number. It's a huge number, and when you just see the cost of servicing the interest alone is staggering. But yeah, I agree with you. It's hard to.
I found maybe a good picture because I just like bringing this up because it always shocked me when I saw it the first time. When you have kind of like $100 bill, then like $10,000, you have $1 million, then you have like 100 million, then you have $1 billion. It's already big. But if you go from $1 billion to $1 trillion, it's just unimaginably bigger than like 100 million. It's very hard to comprehend how much bigger that kind of money is.
That's crazy. Yeah, because look, you can, like a million, you could probably carry a couple of those in a backpack, right? If you in cash, like as you kind of see in a Breaking Bad or whatever, right? I remember that actually in Breaking Bad when he's standing next to a pallet of money. So he was, probably in that order of approaching, tens of, if not 100 million. But yeah, the trillion thing is nuts. It's absolutely crazy. It's hard to. This actually really helps.
Yeah, there's this great meme from Breaking Bad where I don't remember how they are called. The Breaking Bad guy, and the wife standing in front of the pallet of money in this garage container thing, and it's so nice. Like, oh shit.
Exactly. Yeah. Great series. One of the best of all time, I think. Breaking Bad. Yeah.
If for anyone that hasn't watched this one, you're in for a treat. You mentioned AI, and I think AI is something really interesting. And I love the kind of the conversion or the intersection between AI and Bitcoin, because AI is making humanity a lot more efficient. I opened a small company and I opened a small business account, and you have to fill out so many forms. And it would probably take me with a tax consultant sometimes to actually fill out those forms, because I sometimes don't even understand the words that they are writing there. But with AI, it took me like an hour, and it filled everything out, and I sent it to my tax consultant and made no mistakes, and which is crazy to think about that. And there are many of those examples. And then we have Bitcoin, this only thing that is completely digital scarce, like you cannot make more of it. Wow. And if you convert both together, like you have one fixed thing where you can save your energy in, and it just gets more valuable over time. And the other side, it brings the value, it brings the time that we need to produce something down in all the capacity. This is a really interesting and powerful connection. Have you thought about the framework, what happens if AI and Bitcoin specifically like interact?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting world, and it's an interesting time to be alive. With AI, kind of with anything, there's always a utopian view, and there's also the dystopian view, right? People like think of AI and they think, oh, this is amazing, it's going to help us with everything, and then in the end, people like, look, it's going to be the Matrix, we're just going to be like, we're going to be enslaved by the machines, by the computers, because they're going to be so much smarter than us and know how to manipulate us. And it's kind of the same with crypto as well, right? If you think about, if you take the CBDC to the extreme, it's very dystopian, where everything that you spent is tracked, and so that they can profile and know, and program money in a way that can be very controlling and make the government very powerful. And so whenever I'm thinking about AI, I'm always thinking about, in a way that we can do it that's in a responsible way, so that we can maintain these, for me, Bitcoin is so much about civil liberties. It's about freedom. It's about improving the plight of the humans in this planet. Somebody living in a hyperinflationary country, let's say it's Venezuela, or some place where it's got a broken banking system, this is a lifeline for them. This is important. It's essential for them to lift them out of poverty, or whatever their story is. So there is this kind of the social upliftment, this kind of like moving towards a better world feeling. And I think if we go into, and certainly in the fusion of Bitcoin and AI, I think we just kind of have to keep that in mind, and in the design and in the approach that we take, because we don't, with the record keeping and the power of AI, it can also, there is the possibility of this. Of it being dystopian as well. And I think we all have to be gatekeepers of that, and making sure that we're moving in a direction which is, net positive, and where our freedoms and our happiness isn't eroded, because we feel like we've lost control. So yeah.
I think so too. I hope we can, and I hope we can make it open source at least. I feel like open sourcing things like that is very important. Unfortunately, I think 60% of the market share is now with OpenAI, which is closed AI.
Yeah.
Then the Gemini is getting more popular with Google, which obviously is also closed source. I actually don't know. Maybe they're open source. I have actually never looked it up, but I couldn't imagine them being open source. But yeah, I think only X AI is open source from what I know, and it has a smaller market share. So yeah, I feel like open sourcing AI could be a good step to ensure the freedoms of humanity. But I'm always optimistic. It might be a flaw, might be a good thing, but I always try to look at what can something do good for the world. And if I look at AI, I think it will accelerate a lot of things. And people always have the fear of being replaced by AI. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think whole teams of people will be replaced by one person using AI. So the thing that previously was made by 5 people is now used by one person that uses AI in a very efficient way. Yeah. So in a kind of way, AI is replacing jobs, but the same way. I always bring up the example. There was a point in history where 80% of people worked on farms.
Right.
So, and now how many people in the world working on farms? 10%. I have no clue what the statistics is, but it's a lot smaller than 80%. So work just changes. It doesn't disappear.
Right. And this is the story of technology, right? The reason why people moved, into cities was because of technology and because of the Industrial Revolution and the, creation of machines and factories and, being able to produce all these goods. And I think it is unsettling. It will cause instability in the population because, this transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's painful. People have to be reskilled. They have to, learn how to do something different to what they've done before. I was in San Francisco recently. I was at the Bitwise head office, which is in San Francisco, and I took a Waymo. I actually took a lot of Waymos when I was in so Waymo, for people who don't know, it's a completely driverless cab. A very nice cars in, like these Jaguar I-Pace. It's a very, it's a luxurious car, and it's got all sorts of hardware on the roof. It's got different kinds of, laser and radar technology, and they're very good. And you get in there, it's great. They pick you up where you need to be picked up. They drop you off. There's nobody in the car to bother you. It's very nice and quiet. It's calm. There's no kind of smell like somebody lived in the car that sometimes you get, or annoying person who's chewing gum or on the phone to somebody like talking loudly while you. And I just thought actually this experience is actually better than Uber or other kinds of companies. It is a better experience. And it kind of made me think about, that it felt like would only be a matter of time before, these kind of driverless hailing, systems like Uber, would take over. And also, if you start to think about it, if you're feeling vulnerable, if you're like let's say a woman on your own at night, it's actually really nice to be able to get into a car where there's no driver. You feel just safer. It's not potentially somebody who's a bad actor. You don't know nothing. You don't know anything about them, right? You're just getting in this car with them. It's quite a vulnerable place to be. So I think that's an example. Of course, a lot of people really rely on working as Uber or Bolt or whatever company it is for their livelihood, and so that'll be painful when that transfer happens. And I think that's just one example of tens of thousands where AI and the growth of technology will replace humans. Of course, you need people to service all those cars. You need people to program them, to refine them, to test them, and so there's thousands of jobs, more upskilled jobs that are being created. But it's a shift, like just from what you said, from somebody who was working a field and plowing, some corn or whatever it was, to actually working in a factory. It's a new set of skills that they have to learn. Yeah.
I think generally jobs will move upwards the ladder, where you need to be more skilled and more advanced as you go along. And so I had an interesting experience. I was in Miami, I think like 5 months ago, and I went to the Tesla dealership and just said like, hey, I want to try the autonomous driving thing, and they gave me a Tesla Model S for like an hour, and I was there with my girlfriend and just sat in there just drove myself like 5 minutes to just have fun because it's a fun car to drive also. And then I put on the self-driving mode on, and I didn't pick up the car for like 50 minutes. It just drove around. And every once in a while, I just, for fun, was driving myself again. And at the end of the 1 hour, my girlfriend said to me that she is preferring the car to drive instead of me driving. She's already feeling safer with the car driving than I driving.
100%. I mean, even a couple of days ago, I was driving and I was following the Waze or whatever but I had somebody in my car and I was talking to them and, I got distracted and I missed the turn off, of course. And, and then you kind of correct and then you make a sudden movement and it's dangerous. Whereas if it was running by itself, you wouldn't have that. It would be looking, So for sure, I can understand her point of view.
Yeah, you cannot compete as a human being. You will never be able to compete with a robo taxi, which has 8 cars or 8. I think Venmo has a different approach to Tesla, but they basically all have like a lot of eyes around the car. That you only have 2 and the car has like 8. You're not the car will never be distracted. It will have the data from all the best drivers around the world. They already know what happens on the road because it has driven there like 1 million times with all the data they're collecting, and you maybe have been there for the first time. So it won't be fair to compare a human driver to an AI driver at some point.
And actually, it's only going to get better if you think about it, right? Just from the networking effect, right? So if you've got these cars that are able to network and communicate with each other, the more cars you have on the road that are enabled with that, then they will just seamlessly, interact with each other. It'll be almost like, packets being directed, on the internet, TCP/IP, and because there will be this kind of awareness of where all the other cars are, and they'll be communicating with each other, and it'll just be, smoother, and also you'll have less traffic because people will seamlessly be rerouting and avoiding areas where there's congestion. So yeah.
100%. One more topic that I want to get into, because people always love price predictions, and I found that a nice article of Bitwise. I don't know how much you can talk about that, but I will just bring it up. It was written from Bitwise, I think, December 2024, so it's about like half a year old, a little bit over half a year. Here the authors is Matt Hogan and Ryan. I don't know those people. You probably do know them. And they have, I have 2 interesting predictions. And the first is like, of course, Bitcoin in 2025, 200,000 seems realistic still. If we have a good past year, let's see. And we have the what was it? The bonus prediction. I love that Bitcoin will overtake the gold market in 2029. I love that one. I have a similar one with like around 2030 is probably the time where Bitcoin overtakes gold. I hope so. This will make Bitcoin the most valuable asset on earth, which is awesome. How do you look at that? And you probably was aware of something like that.
Yeah. So firstly, just a shout out to Matt and Ryan, who do this every year. They produce this because they're also accountable to it as well. They will at the end of the year say, how did we do? And they produce their own scorecards. And I think last year, if I remember, we got 6 out of 10 right or something like that. Or they did pretty well. I think, look, no one has a crystal ball. Will Bitcoin reach 200,000 this year? I think it's very likely. Personally, I think that's likely. Will it reach 200,000? Certainly, it's a certainty. It will at some point. But will it happen this year? I think probably. And when it does happen, I think it'll happen suddenly, because what we have going on in the world right now is we have more and more people coming in, more and more buying pressure, absorbing all the available sellers. And then of course you have the people, the ETFs, you have the nation states, sovereigns buying. Now you have the Bitcoin treasury companies, Strategy and the like, MetaPlanet, Blockchain Group. There are dozens and dozens. In fact, I think the last statistic I saw, there were over 125 listed companies that had Bitcoin in their treasury. They have bought, only the listed companies, because then there's a lot of private companies who bought as well, but they don't have to disclose. They have bought over 800,000 Bitcoin, right? And they keep buying. They keep buying and they accelerate the buying. And at a certain point, we already see that exchange balances are low in terms of the free Bitcoin that's available. At a certain point, and I've worked in trading my whole career. When you have this crazy kind of demand, you don't have to actually be a rocket scientist to figure it out. That at a certain point, when the supply dries up, where people don't want to sell anymore, the people who are out there, they believe that it's going to be higher, so they don't want to sell. Then it's going to start to gap up, and it's going to gap up in a meaningful way. And so we've seen it going like, it's going up to 108,000, and it's gone back down to 106, and then it goes back up, and it's kind of been trading sideways. At a certain point, in my opinion, and I don't have a crystal ball, and this isn't investment advice, it's going to jump to 120, 140, 200. Why? Because when there's all this buying pressure and there's no one selling, then what is going to happen? And of course, once you reach those higher points, then some people will say, at that price, I want to sell. And people, the retail investor, they want to buy real world things. They want to buy flats or whatever it is. And so, or pay the bills, right? Simple as that. Or go on holiday. And so they may believe in Bitcoin, but they have these kind of real world things that they want to do. And so they will sell. But at a certain point, the buying pressure is just going to be overwhelming, and then we're going to start to head towards those crazy numbers. I absolutely believe, like you do, that Bitcoin will overtake gold and become the most valuable asset in the world. Gold, you can always pull more of it out of the ground, and with improved technology, you can find gold in the center of the world that nobody knew existed before, and send crazy mining robots down to get it. In Bitcoin, there's no opportunities to do that. And once that sinks into people that this is something it's better gold. It's simply, it is better gold. It's gold you can teleport around the world. And that's a powerful concept once you realize that it's scarcer and it's better. It's a better form of money, a better form of store of value than gold. The flip it's inevitable. It will happen.
I 100% agree with you here, obviously, and liked it a lot. We have one question to ask each and every one of my guests, and the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
What can we learn from me besides Bitcoin? Look, I've been around. I've lived in a lot of countries. I was born in South Africa. I grew up there. I moved to Belgium. I moved to the United States. I lived in New York for many years. I worked there. I worked in Paris as well, in investment banking. I worked in London for many years, and I live in Lisbon now. And certainly what I have learned from living in all these different places that there's good people everywhere, and actually pretty much in the same proportion, the good people and assholes, the balance is about roughly the same. I mean, there are some pockets of the world where maybe that balance is a little bit broken, but on the whole, I think there are good people everywhere, and living there, of course, cultures are different, and you may find yourself in a culture that's more harmonious with who you are and where you are in your stage of your life. It's one of the reasons why I really love the global nature of Bitcoin. It's for everybody. It's for all people. We are all the same, and fundamentally, in the end, even though we differ in our political views and everything else, and I do love that. That this kind of unifying view that it has, and this apolitical view as well of uniting people and behind a better world. I brought it back to Bitcoin. I know I wasn't supposed to, but
everyone does. It's like 99% of the answers that I get here is like something else, but they always bring it back to Bitcoin.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So look, and that's what from me. I'm just really sort of super accepting about people, and really an internationalist at heart.
That's awesome. Okay. There's like one small nugget I want to add here. I was already blind a little bit to it. My girlfriend was for the first time ever at a Bitcoin conference, and we have been together like 2.5 years now, longer than that. And it's the first time that she saw the Bitcoin community at scale. Of course, she met some people when we were out for dinner and stuff like that, but at scale. And she's like, it's so different than to her industry that she's working in. The people are just way more friendly, way more open, just like a whole different vibe. The conference feels not like a conference. It's more like almost a festival, almost like a celebration of Bitcoin, and less of like a hardcore conference. And this kind of opened my eyes. I'm like, yeah, I also came from IT security, and the conferences in IT security are very different to the Bitcoin conferences. I won't even like it's almost a bad word to call them conference. It's more like a celebration for me. So I really do enjoy that, and I think in country wise, it's a similar aspect ratio of like assholes and nice people, but maybe within Bitcoin country, the aspect ratio is better than in other industries.
No, I think you're onto something then. I think it's just it's a matter of people once they see this and are unified by this vision, it's a celebration, and it's exactly what you say. They see, but really everyone believes that in their way, in the way that they're contributing to this, that we're moving to a better world. I think Bitcoin is not just a technology; it's it's a philosophy, and a very powerful one at that.
Be seen. I have one more question for every guest, a question that comes from the previous guest. So the end routine of the podcast is the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asked you a political question from America. So you're from Europe, so I don't know how much opinion you have on that. But the question is, 1 year from now, will people see the US Trump tariffs as something positive for the USA or something negative for the USA?
So firstly, I want to decouple so for me, I want to answer that question. I just want to talk about tariffs in general. I'm a firm believer that that tariffs can be used, if they're used very carefully and very surgically, it can be a good thing. And sometimes it's important. Maybe a certain industry is something that needs to be protected for strategic reasons, because it's maybe a huge employer or whatever it is. But when tariffs are blanket and across the board, and I think it's not a good thing. I think it leads to inflation. I think it leads to stagnation. It leads to ultimately to job losses, and I think it's not good for either the economy that's doing the tariffs, that's issuing the tariffs, and the country that's receiving. I think it's a lose-lose. That's my personal belief. Sometimes you've seen it like historically with steel and other industries where it's something's considered really important strategically to the country, and there may be tariffs in that area, but then mostly I'm definitely a free market person, and yeah, so that's my answer. I think it will be seen as a net negative.
I'm the same. I always see, it could strategic be interesting for America. I have no clue. Maybe it gives him some leverage to have some negotiation. But in general, I just like free trade. Like I'm always for free trade and not for friction. And tariffs is just a friction for the people, for the companies, and make things harder. But yeah, maybe I don't know. Maybe there's some weird negotiation happening, and because of that, he gets some deals like that. That's too much. That's too high class politician play for me.
Right.
But yeah, thank you so much, Bradley, for being on the show. Before I let you go, where can people find you? Where can people reach out to you?
Yeah, so look, people. I think maybe I'm on X. Bradley BTC is my handle. Also on LinkedIn as well. If that's easier for some people to reach out. And I try to answer if people reach out for other reasons than to sell stuff. I usually respond, plus I speak a lot at conferences. I represent Bitwise, speaking about our own products and also just general trends in the industry. So, there's a good chance that if you go to one of these digital assets or Bitcoin conferences, you might see me there, and I'm always happy to have a beer or coffee and talk.
Awesome. The same thing we did in Prague. I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you so much, Bradley.
Thank you. All right. Thank you.
And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.